Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conflict Resolution. Thanks for coming. My name's Heather Smith. I am a marriage and family therapist. I work over at Counseling Services. And I will be going over the basics of getting through conflict today. If you guys have questions as we go, feel free to raise your hand. I don't mind, that's fine. But otherwise, you can save them for the end if you want. So I want to start off by, I guess, setting the tone that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it. That conflict is inevitable in life. It's just kind of a byproduct of different people existing in the same space, I think. And so kind of our ideal or the goal of the presentation is not to help you figure out to never have a conflict with someone ever again, but just how to get through it with your relationships intact. Let's see here. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can prepare for a potentially difficult conversation or prepare for a conflict. What to do in the moment of truth. So when you're actually trying to figure out something with someone, what do you do? And then how do you handle kind of the aftermath of that? And then we'll also talk about times when it might be better to bring in reinforcements to help you out if you're feeling stuck. But before we get to that, I just wanted to kind of go over all of the different people that we can potentially clash with. I think the subtitle of this presentation was, roommates, professors, and family or something like that, but there are a lot of people we can have conflict with, and it tends to be more like roommates at this point, and coworkers, and professors, and sorority sisters, and fraternity brothers, and basically anybody you can think of. And since conflict can be kind of uncomfortable, some of us get creative in how we try to handle it or navigate it. So one way you can try to deal with conflict is by avoiding it altogether. We're not going to talk about it. I'm not going to interact with you about it. We're just going to pretend it's not happening and get through. And sometimes that's kind of the right choice or an okay thing to do. But when that's your go-to for every situation, then that's probably going to start causing problems for you. Another conflict style, I guess you could say, is to try and be really accommodating. So this is really uncomfortable. I don't want you to be mad at me, so I'm going to give you your way. Like, oh yeah, totally. Like, I can do that. Yeah, it's fine. Kind of rolling over, which is also sometimes a good thing, but not if that's what you always do. So another style would be competing, or I think of kind of bulldozing, of like, okay, here's what I want out of this conversation, and I'm going to make sure it happens. And sometimes that can mean that you're kind of squelching the other person's perspective or needs. Also not a great move for every conversation. Another style would be to compromise, and that can be, I think, a lot of people's ideal sometimes, and sometimes it is a really good thing. Basically, it's that you're willing to give a little to get a little. We can trade off or meet in the middle, but that doesn't always work, especially if it's a values issue or other situations where giving a little kind of isn't an option. So then we're left with collaborating, and that's what is hopefully a win-win situation where each side or each person is trying to account for what they want and need, but also what the other person might want and need, and working together to find a solution where everybody wins. So that's the ideal. It doesn't always happen, but that's the ideal. So we are faced with conflict. What do? Don't kick people in the face. That's step number one. So if you know you're going to have a tough conversation with someone, let's say like your roommate never does her dishes and it's been like a month and everybody's getting pissed and like we don't know what to do about it and we know we're going to have to like have a conversation at some point, what do you do to get ready for that? So first step is to maybe take a little space for yourself and try to get clear on what the situation is and what you actually want. So it's useful, I think, to clarify what are your thoughts and feelings, what do you need, what would you like, and what are you willing to do and not willing to do. So look, I'm willing to help you out on the days that you have tons of classes and you can't get your stuff done, but I really need you to try and do the dishes, a certain number of days a week, whatever. But it helps to get really clear on that beforehand, before you're in the heat of the moment, so that you make sure you know what you're even aiming for. So then, when it's the moment of truth, there's some good guidelines to follow. And you'll see on your handout, there's a more expanded list of kind of rules for when we disagree that are helpful to keep it from escalating. So first one would be to decide on a time and a place, and don't start until everybody's ready. I'm sure you guys have probably experienced like an argument or a really like tough conversation that seems to break out at like 2 in the morning when you need to get to bed because you have an 8 o'clock class, or you haven't eaten all day, you have homework left to do, but all of a sudden we're in this really heated conversation that has to be taken care of right now. Never goes well. Never goes well. So it's really valuable to kind of agree on a time and a place. And that's true if you're in a couple, that's true if it's roommates, that's true if it's you and a professor that's clashing, whoever. It's also really important to try and stay focused on the topic. And that's why it's also valuable to take that time beforehand to try and think through it, maybe write some thoughts down. I have to write stuff down or I forget everything. To come in prepared so that you can stay focused on the topic and not be like, not only are you not doing the dishes, but you smell weird, and I don't like your bedspread, and everything you do is dumb. That's not as helpful. So picking a topic and sticking to it tends to help the conversation go better. It's also really important to give everybody time to speak. So you don't have to like make sure it's like equal, but everybody needs to be able to have their say. And these things become even more important when it's closer relationships. So like it's one thing to navigate things with like a professor that you're not going to see after that semester, or maybe a coworker for your summer job or whatever. But this stuff really matters when it's like your best friend, or when it's your partner that you've been with, or your mom and dad, that it really matters how that relationship goes. So the closer you are, the more important that relationship is, the more important these things are. Because you can't escape, or you don't want to. So a big goal of that conversation to try and keep in mind is that you're trying to understand each other, not win. And that's really hard for those of us who like to argue. I like to win. But that doesn't actually get you anywhere. I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase that you can either be right or you can be happy. And it's really true in those kind of conversations. It's important to watch your tone and watch your volume. Maybe you guys have experienced that you said something and it came out a little sassier than intended, and then all of a sudden it's an argument. Whereas, or maybe someone said something to you and it was loud, and so it felt like they were yelling at you, and so then you're feeling like, I'm on the defensive. Trying to speak softly and speak kindly goes a long way. And it's okay to take a time out if things are getting too heated. If you're getting overwhelmed, if you're getting stuck, by all means, take a time out and come back to it a little bit later. Because when you're getting overwhelmed, we call it emotional flooding. When you're kind of in that red zone where you're super upset, so you're crying, or you're getting really mad, or you're getting really defensive, feeling attacked, you can't get anywhere. And you should take at least 20 minutes to try and get back under that threshold to where you can actually engage in the conversation again. The key is that you have to come back to it, but it's okay to take timeouts. Obviously, no threats, no violence. Hopefully that's an obvious one. It's okay to give it some time and come back to it. And that it's really important, when you're trying to tackle a specific issue, to try and find measurable solutions. So you'll see on your sheet, I think the example they give, like if you're in a marriage and you feel like you're never making dinner, a measurable solution would be, okay, I'll make dinner 3 times a week, not I'll try to be better about housework. That one you can't really measure, you can't really tell if you're doing it or not. But dinner 3 times a week, you can follow up on that. Let's see. And then you can read about kind of even more reminders on your handout. So in addition to those ground rules, some different techniques you can try. And a lot of these come from couple therapy suggestions. But like I said, they're kind of generalizable to all of our relationships, even professional and school ones. So a really important thing is called the soften startup. They have found in studying people's interactions that the best way to predict how a conversation will go is how it's started. So the way to predict how it will end is how it will start. And that means if you can try to approach it in a non-attacking, non-blaming manner, that helps a lot. Try to speak, I guess, how you'd want to be spoken to. It helps to try and keep it limited to like facts and observations, like, hey, I've been noticing this, or here's the situation, and here's kind of what I'd like to see happen, as opposed to, you're doing this, you are this, you're making me mad, rah. In that same vein, I statements are really important. So trying to frame things from your own perspective and owning your own thoughts and feelings about something frees the other person up to express theirs instead of kind of feel defensive against what you're saying. And like I was saying before about timeouts, that keeping calm is a really big deal. That's a really important part of it. That if you notice yourself starting to like breathe shallowly or feel shaky or get really, really mad, that it's okay to kind of keep track of that in yourself and then do whatever you got to do to keep yourself from getting flooded. So you can breathe deeply, you can take the time out, or you can do what we call naming it to tame it. You can just be immediate with that and say, like, this is really making me nervous, or I'm feeling attacked, I'm feeling myself get defensive. Or you could, even when you're starting up the conversation, you could say, I'm really afraid to say this because I don't want to hurt your feelings, and that's important to me, but here's how I've been feeling, or here's what I've noticed. A lot of times just making that overt, helping the other person understand what's going on with you, can help diffuse some of the tension. Any questions so far? It's all pretty straightforward. Okay, so here's some important moves to avoid. Also, big components of what we talk about when I work with couples, but if anybody's heard of the relationship researcher named John Gottman, he studies couples in his Love Lab, and he basically has them interact, and he takes notes and kind of observes how they interact and then what happens with their marriage as time goes on. And he's found that there's 4 behaviors and interactions that predict divorce always, pretty much.
The 4 horsemen?
Mm-hmm. So these would be called the 4 horsemen. But once again, these are behaviors that are damaging to any relationship. And as you read them, you can see why, because if someone treats you like that, it feels awful. So the first one would be criticism, and that is where you are saying, you forgot to pick me up, why are you so irresponsible, I can never depend on you, always and never tend to factor into those statements a lot. Framing something as an attack on someone's character instead of saying, like, I felt really disappointed that you forgot, what can we do to make sure that you remember to come get me? Contempt, kind of similar, but there's an extra layer of disgust. So that's, name calling, eye rolling. It's basically feeling like you're better than someone and trying to kind of put them down. No one appreciates that. Defensiveness, I'm sure we've all experienced defensive people or maybe felt ourselves get defensive. It's hard to take negative feedback. It's hard to maybe hear how you've upset someone else or hurt someone else or disappointed them. And it's really easy and tempting sometimes to want to kind of push that off on them. Like, well, but you do this. And like, well, you don't understand because of this, that, and the other thing. And so that's where kind of calming yourself can be really helpful, and trying to be immediate of saying like, oh, I feel myself getting defensive, but I really want to try and hear what you're saying, and repeating it back can be helpful. And the final one, and what I think is probably the most harmful for me when I see marriages kind of using this a lot, that's a really bad sign, and that's stonewalling. So that's someone who just won't even engage at all. So that's silent treatment, leaving the room, refusing to talk about it. Maybe they're still there, but they won't make eye contact, they won't listen, or maybe that's what you're doing. Those are really, really harmful habits that just shut everything down really quickly and do a lot of damage. So, after you have hopefully survived your difficult conversation, what do you do next? So I think it's really valuable to take a little bit of time and space to kind of review how things went in your head. So we would call that processing. It just means to make sense of something. So taking a little bit of time to evaluate, like, okay, how did that go? Did I express what I needed to express? Are my needs being met? Did we come up with a good solution that I'm okay with? And if something needs to change, what would that be? And then it's also like draining sometimes if it's a really hard conversation. And so there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of time to just take care of yourself again. So maybe going for a run or a walk, listening to music you like, reading a book, watching the Netflix, whatever makes you happy. And then I think an important part of navigating conflict with other people, especially in our closer relationships, is understanding that it's never just a one-time thing. It's usually something that you're going to have to keep coming back to and coming back to. It's an ongoing process of figuring out how to be in a friendship together, in a relationship together, in a family together. You're never done. And so it's important to revisit and revise if you need to. So follow up on the conversation with that person and see if you guys need to change anything. Okay, so if you have tried what you think are all of your healthiest tricks and not used any of the bad habits, and you're still not getting anywhere, then that might be a time when you need to kind of bring in some extra help, some reinforcements, some fresh perspective to help you get unstuck in that situation. Other times when it's appropriate to get help would be if you're feeling unsafe. So maybe if you're interacting with someone who uses those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness, and you can't get anywhere with that person, then maybe it's time to bring in a third party or reevaluate the relationship if necessary. If you're feeling physically unsafe, if that's someone who's maybe prone to getting really, really angry or really, really mean, or if there's any threat of violence, of course, then that would be a situation where you don't have to try and win that battle. That's not always worth fighting. And then there's also situations where we have a big difference in our levels of power. So that would be like with your parents, because maybe they control all of your money. Maybe they control, like they have the title to your car. Maybe they are the ones who pay your tuition. And, some of them like to threaten that if you're not getting along, and that'd be a really painful thing to have to risk just because you're disagreeing about something. Or a professor who's in charge of your grades, and the other person doesn't necessarily always have to have bad intentions. It's just that can also just make it harder to bring things up in the first place. So who can help? So first line of defense for a lot of us would be to consult maybe like another trusted friend or another family member who kind of knows both of you and can like give you some perspective on the situation. A lot of times that's all most of us need, but sometimes it's good to bring in like an impartial third party. So sometimes like a mediator would be appropriate, or maybe a friend or family member who can kind of try and referee a conversation between you and whoever. A lot of people consult with their spiritual leaders. If you are, a religious person or a spiritual person, couples oftentimes will, counsel with their pastors if they're having issues, or even just other people in their congregation, because they can be a great source of support and guidance, especially if you're trying to kind of come at it from your spiritual framework. So that can be a good option. On campus, there's lots of places you can turn to when you are stuck. So, didn't want to give you the full rundown of everybody, but a good place to start is like Office of Student Life or the Office of Institutional Equity. And those are for times for discrimination and those sorts of things. Campus Police, if you're feeling like your safety is jeopardized. The Crisis Center and the Care Center for those who've been affected by violence. And then there's other times that you're feeling stuck, you think you can work it out, but you could use a little bit of support kind of ongoing. Counseling Services and the Family Center here on campus are really great resources. So Counseling Services, where I am, it's in the English building. We meet with only K-State students, so as long as you're a student, you can come, and your student fee pays for or covers 4 free sessions of therapy. And so you you're welcome to come on in. You can come in by yourself. You can bring your roommate in if that's who you're having conflict with, as long as they're a K-State student. And you can kind of pick someone's brain about where you're getting stuck and hopefully try to get unstuck. The Family Center is a really great resource, also here on campus. I can't remember the name of the building. What's the name of the building? The Campus Creek Complex. So they see K-State students, but they also see community members, so you don't have to be a student. So maybe you're having conflict with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and they're not a student right now. You could go talk to a counselor about it over at the Family Center. And both of those have low-cost services, so that's really nice when you're a student. And so for those of us who like to do research on our own or like to look things up on our own, there's also several websites you can consult with through K-State. The counseling webpage has the full rundown of all of our services and everything, but they also have a lot of resources for like stress management. They have different articles on conflict resolution, that kind of a thing. You can access old cat chats if you want to review what we talked about here or catch one that you missed before. It's a really great resource for information. Same with K-State One Stop, especially if you're being affected with your safety or your class or something like that, then there's a lot of good resources there. And then University Life Cafe through K-State has a lot of different articles and all kinds of things you can look through to learn more about these things. So that's my presentation. Do you guys have any questions or comments or anything like that? The handout that I gave you goes over those rules I talked about for conflict, and it also lists the 4 horsemen, the moves to avoid. And then on the back, if you notice, there's self-statements that you can kind of go over or refer to when you're trying to psych yourself up to have a good conversation. They're kind of like mantras that you can try to keep in mind when you're in a tense situation to try and make it more successful. Thank you guys for attending. If you do have any questions, you can catch me over here. Make sure that you signed in. And if you didn't get a handout or you want anything else about counseling services, they're down here at the front.